In this lecture, we will learn about how to use SQLite database to store our data. As you know that all applications need a place to save data. So this data may be related to the data collected by the mobile phone, for example, your GPS location, your accelerometer, or maybe data related to your application, such as in our case that what are the details of the report or any other data. Now there are from our knowledge of other computer science subjects such as database operating systems and file systems and operating systems, we know that there could be multiple ways in which you can store data. So one simple way of storing data is as a file in a file system, and Google does provide us in the Android operating system as a very good file system which is similar to what we get in our Linux operating system. So while the Android allows us the capability to store data into a file, the major problem with storing data in files is that if you have to make any modification, suppose you have created a long file with all the lists that you are going to use, all the reports that you are going to use, and if you have to make, let us say, just one change in the title of the one report, you will have to read the entire file. So this is not very efficient. It is also not very efficient on desktops, and that's why we use something very specialized which is called databases. So you may have already taken a database course, and you may already understand the normal basics of SQL databases. Here in this example and in context of Android, we will use something which is called SQLite. So SQLite is just a lightweight version of a SQL database, and in this, just like a normal database, we can store data in form of tables, and when we have to modify something, only thing that we need is to modify a field in the table. So unlike files, the database provides us a faster access, a easier way to manage our data. So let's get started with SQLite databases in Android. We will continue with our original program that we have been developing, the report intent, and now we will be using SQLite to save details about the reports. As I have told you earlier in the previous videos that the example here has been taken from the Big Nerd Ranch Guide for Android programming, and if you go to the website of the Big Nerd Ranch Guide for Android programming, you can find out the code that we are developing. The code that we are developing here is slightly different than the code they have developed, because I wanted you to develop the code while watching these videos instead of just copying the code from the website. But if you at all need the source of the code, you can go to the website and you can do it. So let's get started with the SQLite databases. So the first step that we need for our database to be used is to define a schema. So a schema is nothing but how your data is going to be stored. So for example, in our case where we are storing reports, we may want to store the title of the report, we may want to store the date of the report, we may want to store the status whether it has been resolved or not, and then we may want to give it a unique ID as to each report. So that is what our schema looks like, and that's how our uh, each row in a table will look like. So let's say if we have a reports table, it will have four fields. One is UUID, which is a unique ID, another title, another date, and then another is the resolved status. So this would be our schema for to begin with. So let's just start working and see that how can we use SQLite databases in Android programming to store some data. So this is our program as we saw last time. Let's just have a quick run to understand where we left, and then we will start. So last time we implemented recycler view, adapter view, and we changed the toolbar. So mainly we worked on the UI, and we also implemented a view pager so that we can look at the reports very clearly. This time we will work more on how to store the data. So let me run it very quickly, and then we can move on to use the SQLite database. So that's how our application now look like. There is a plus button to add a report. We can give it a title, let's say first report, We can choose a date, any date is fine. We can do a resolved. We can go back from the toolbar. So our toolbar now has a menu, and it also has something called a show subtitle, hide subtitle. So this was the functionality that we developed so far. And if we add another report, let's say second report, and I'll just choose any other date, leave it unresolved, we go back. And the good part is that we can now use the view pager to go from one report to another report. So this is all done, and now we will use the SQLite database to store information about the report in our database. So the first step that we are going to take is to create a new class which we call as report db schema. The report db schema will be our main class for storing the schema. So let's start creating it. So I will first click on the new, then I will click on Java class. I will give it the name report db schema, and I press OK. My report db schema has now been created. So the first thing we will do is we will create an inner class called report table, and this report table will be an inner class of report db schema. And as we discussed earlier when we were watching the SQLite slides, that it is always a good practice to use inner classes for each of the tables. So now we are going to create an inner class to represent one of the table, which is our table called report table. So public static final class report table, and public static final string name equal to reports. Now let us add information about the different columns that we are going to have. And earlier we decided to have 4 columns. So let's get that working. Public static final class columns, public static final string uuid equal to uuid. I will just copy this line, makes it much easier for me to write the code. So first was the uuid, second was the title, third was the date, third was the date, and the fourth was the resolved status. So uuid, title, date, resolved. So these are the 4 columns that we decided earlier to have, and if you look at our application, then that is what it has. So it has mainly that is what it has: title, date, resolved status. So now we will be able to refer to these columns name title in our program. Now let's start building our initial database. So now because our schema is defined, we can create the database, and Android provides us some low level methods on context to create, open a database file as an instance of SQLite database. So that is how we started. So we will be doing following steps. Number one, that we will first check that if the database already exists. This is just a normal step that we have been following with other concepts as well. And if it doesn't, then we will create it, and then we will create the tables, and we will create the initial data that it needs. And if the database does exist, then we will see that what version of the database it is, and if it is an old version, then we will try to upgrade it to a newer version. So let's start with creating our database now. So we will first create a helper class, and we will name it report base helper. So the one thing that we have to do is that we will have to extend the SQLite open helper class. So this is our first step in creating the database, or maybe our second step in creating a database, because our first step was to define the schema. SQLite open helper. This is giving me an error because I need to override some of the methods. So once we have overridden those methods, this error will go away. So the first thing is that we need to keep track of the version. So we are defining final int version equal to 1. So after the version number, we will give a name to our database. So let's give a name to our database. Private static final string database name equal to, we can just give it the name report base.db. Now let's start creating it. So public report base helper context super context database name null and version. The super refers to this SQLite open helper. We are still getting an error because we are still need to override some important methods. One such method is public void on create SQLite database db, and the another method that we need to override is on upgrade. So after these override, hopefully our error should go away. So public void on upgrade SQLite database db int old version int new version, and that's it. As you see that the error has gone away. So we have overridden the required methods which are part of SQLite open helper. One is an on create method which is used to create a database if it doesn't exist. Another is on upgrade method which is to upgrade a database if the database does exist. We defined a database name and we define a version. Now we will be using this class to open a SQLite database. So now let's go back to our original class report store, and inside this class we will be now using a database. So private context m context and private SQLite database m database. Then in the report store we will write some code. So in the report store m context equal to context dot get application context m database equal to new report base helper context dot get writable database, because we need to write some information to the database, so we are getting a writable database. And then the rest of the code is same as it was earlier. So now we have got a instance of a writable database. Now when we write this code, the get writable database, there are three things happen. Number one, our report base helper will open up /data slash in.ac.replytd.psync.mc16.report intent. That is the full package name of my application /database slash the database name, which in our case was report_base.db. So it creates this new database file in that location. The location is /data/application full name /databases. So this file is created if it does not already exist. So, and if this is the first time, then the database has been created, then the onCreate is called and the latest version number is saved. If this is not the first time, then the version number is checked, and if the version number is higher, if the current version number is higher, then the onUpgrade is called. So these three steps are taken by report base helper whenever we have whenever we make a call to this method .get writable database. A good part of this is that now only thing that we need to do is that with the code that will help create us database, we need to put it in onCreate, and the code that we need to run on upgrade, we need to just put it in the onUpgrade, and everything just starts working. So because we now have only one version, we are just starting, we can ignore this onUpgrade, and we need to only work in the onCreate. So let's start working in our onCreate. So we will be writing now some SQL commands. So db.exec SQL. So the first command is to create table plus the report db schema dot report table dot report table dot name. So this is happening because when we described it, we give it like this. Okay, so now I can go to report db schema dot report table, because report table is in a class, and then I can access the name. The same thing I will be doing when I need the names of the columns. Okay, this was the reason why we described the columns name like this. So let's go back. Name. Now we will have to do an import, so watch carefully. Put your name, put your cursor on the table, report table, press Alt Enter. So I have pressed the Alt Enter. Now this is showing me this menu, and the first item says add import for the name of my table, the full name of my table. So I will click it, and it has added the import for my table name. Okay, so you can see it here. So this is an important step. I will just report it. I will just repeat it here. I clicked the report table name, I pressed all enter, and then I selected the first item. So this is fine, and I can check it by saying that correctly the import statement has been brought in. Now let's keep working on our code. So in the same, so we have created the table name. Let's go back, plus because we have added that import, now we can just refer to our column names directly here. Now let's look at it, that what we have done. Now let us look at the code that we have developed. So we are running a SQL command, create table, we are giving it the name, and then we are writing this line which reads as underscore id integer primary key auto increment. Now you understand that we need a primary key. So this is line is what is ensuring it that underscore id integer, and it is a primary key, and it will be auto incremented. Then we write our unique id for the report. Then we write the title of the report, then we write the date of the report, and then we write the status, the resolved or not of the report. So this will be, so this is sort of, this is how our each row of this table will look like. So from this code you can see that we did not have to specify that what will be the type of our columns, which is good. This is a feature of SQLite databases. Now let's run the code, and then we will also like to see how to look for the database that we have just created. So I run the code here. Code is running. I will go to the tools. I'll go to the Android. I'll go to the Android device monitor. It gives me a warning that debug session will be discontinued. That's fine. So we start the Android device monitor. So the Android device monitor is started. Let me show it to you. So this is Android device monitor, and inside that I am going to the file explorer. So in the file explorer I will go to what I told you earlier, data, data, then data, and then I have to look for my application. So it is giving the complete name. So the application is report intent underscore menu bar. So I go here, I go into the database, and yes, here you can see the report base.db. So this is the new database file which has just got created, which we just created through our program code. So you can check it directly on a rooted device or on an emulator by just clearly checking it that everything that you did is actually working. So let's go back and start developing where we left. So now let us make use of our new database. So far we were storing the information in the M reports. Now we will be using our database for this purpose. So let's go to the report store. So far we were using this to store all the data. Now we will not be using it anymore. We will be using our database. So let me remove this. The moment I remove, I get a lot of errors. I will remove that. I will also remove this. I will also remove this, but I have to return. So I will do a list this, and then in the get report also I remove the for loop, and this is fine. So our code is back at the compile stage, but now we are not using the M reports anymore. The second thing that we have to use is to make use of the database that we have created. So when we create a new report, we will have to now write to the database. So yes, let's develop some code for that as well. So the way we write to a SQLite database is by using something what we call as content values. Content values are a key value store class. It is similar to other key value store classes like Java's hash map, and we write things to the content values, and then we use the content values to do a final write to our databases. So let's start working, and first step for us to create a content value for our work. So let's go to report store and write some code here which creates the content value. So private static content values get content values report 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 content values equal to new content values, and then we are going to put the information into it. Values dot put. So we will be putting all the four values that we require, that is UUID, title, date, and the resolved status. So report table dot columns dot uuid dot uuid dot report dot get id dot toString. So now you can understand. So for each item that we want to write, we are putting it into the content values. So same thing for report table dot columns dot title report dot get title. It is already a string, so we need not to change it. Values dot put report table dot columns dot date report dot get date dot get time. So that is fine. And then values dot put report table dot columns dot resolved dot report dot is resolved, and we are using a little bit of Java here. So we want to put the values of 1 or 0. So if it is resolved is true, then it is 1. If it is false, then it is 0. And then we return values. Now earlier we were doing this writing in the M reports. Now we are writing as content values and we are returning it. So the keys are our column names and the values are our values. You earlier saw that when we were defining our database, we also had this id underscore id, but we need not to give the id here when we are creating the content values, because the id will be automatically created as a unique row id. Okay, so we only need the data that we need to store. So that is uuid, title, date, and the resolved status. Now let's insert and update rows into it. So that's our basic code is now ready. So let's go to the add report, content values equal to get content values report r, and now we will do a insert into our database dot insert and report table dot name null values. Okay, so the insert method is taking two important arguments and the one that is rarely used. So the first argument is the table in which we want to insert, and the last argument is the data that we want to insert. The second argument is called a null column hack. Well, this is not frequently used. So this is only used in a very special situations. For example, let's say when we would like to insert an empty content values, and then there are hacks which you can do. So you can put some value here and you can fool the database in inserting an empty value which otherwise it doesn't allow. So we are not discussing the use of that. We are currently concerned about the table in which we want to insert and the values that we want to insert into this. So let us continue applying our content values for inserting data and for updating rows in our database. So now let's go to our different method called update report. So let's do a add another method here, public void update report report string UUID string to report dot get ID to string. Use use port ham database dot update. So what we are trying to do is that we are trying to update the database using this method. So we got the new report with which we will be updating the older report, and report table dot name comma values comma report table dot columns. Let me bring it here. Dot columns dot UUID Now let's try to understand what we are doing in the update. So what we want to do, we want to update certain rows. So first that we will have to give the new value that we want to update, and we have to give the table in which we want to update the rows. And then we will have to specify a where criteria, and whenever the where criteria, as you can understand from your SQL concept, database concept, and wherever the where criteria meets, we want to do the update. So this is what this function does. It takes the table name, so that is fairly easy. It takes the new values that it needs to update, and then it takes the where criteria. Now the where criteria is simply that wherever the UUID matches the UUID given here. However, the code is slightly more complicated, and you may be wondering that why we just simply write that where the UUID is equal to the UUID string. The reason for that is that you may have heard of something called SQL injection attack. And the SQL injection attack happens when a string is passed with a SQL code in it. So now if we just use a direct equal to, and we try to compare directly, then if somebody inserts a SQL code into it, then they can do a SQL injection attack. However, using this code, for example like this is a syntax where it means that whatever comes here will be treated only as a string and not as a SQL code. That is, the code will not be executed, and this is what we originally intended. So when we use the question mark, Whatever we supply will only be treated as a string, and this was our intention, and this will foil a possible SQL injection attack. So please make it a habit to use like this only, because this is a very effective method to avoid the SQL injection attacks. So yeah, so now we have created a simple update method where we can give a criteria, we can give the new values, and we can give the table name. So, and we have also made sure that our update method is a safe update method. Hi, so in this video we saw how to create a SQLite database, and then we wrote the methods to update the database entries, as well as creating, inserting, updating. In the next video with the SQL database, we will see that how to push these updates in our program, and then how to do other database operations. So thank you.